Another shunning proof text the Watchtower gives is 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 11. But now I am writing you to stop keeping company with anyone called a brother who is sexually immoral, or a greedy person, or an idolater, or a reviler, or a drunkard, or an extortioner, not even eating with such a man. Does this verse support shunning? If not, what did Paul mean by not keeping company with certain individuals? What did he mean by not even eating with such a man? For starters, we should note that the Apostle Paul did not mention apostates, or anyone who failed to believe the entire range of a long list of doctrine. In fact, in chapter 15, we find that some in Corinth believed that there was no resurrection of the dead. But note, Paul didn't threaten any of these in Corinth with disfellowshipping or shunning. He merely upheld this essential of Christianity. There were problems in Corinth that have a direct bearing on what is meant at 1 Corinthians chapter 5, and this has to do with congregation meetings. Take note at what is said in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. But while giving these instructions, I do not commend you, because it is not for the better, but for the worse that you meet together. For first of all, I hear that when you come together in a congregation, divisions exist among you, and to an extent I believe it. For there will certainly also be sects among you, so that those who are approved may also become evident. When you come together in one place, it is not really to eat the Lord's evening meal. When you eat it, each one takes his own evening meal beforehand, so that one is hungry, but another is intoxicated. Do you not have houses for eating and drinking? Or do you despise the congregation of God, and make those who have nothing feel ashamed? What can I say to you? Should I commend you? In this I do not commend you. Here the celebration of the Lord's evening meal is shown to be central to Christian meetings. There is no thought of a once-a-year celebration, as some practice, but it certainly seems to be something that those in Corinth did whenever they met together as a congregation. A point driven home in verse 26. For whenever you eat this loaf and drink this cup, you keep proclaiming the death of the Lord until he comes. Paul could not commend these meetings because there were serious problems. After outlining the observance of the Lord's Supper with the bread and the wine, Paul said, Therefore, whoever eats the loaf and drinks the cup of the Lord unworthily will be guilty respecting the body and the blood of the Lord. First, let a man approve himself after scrutiny, and only then let him eat of the loaf and drink of the cup. For the one who eats and drinks without discerning the body, eats and drinks judgment against himself. A Christian would not in their behavior at such gatherings show themselves unworthy of the body and blood of the Lord. Here Paul shows there is a danger of doing this, and that is why some there were not spiritually healthy. Now, with this in mind, let us return to 1 Corinthians chapter 5. The context shows that a certain man had been guilty of egregious immorality. In Greek, the word used was porneia, a word that means to sell, and thus has its origins in the practice of prostitution. However, the word can also mean practices that were unlawful as outlined by the Mosaic law, such as incest. And the man in question was guilty of just that, being with his father's wife, something scandalous, even for those who were not Christian. Notice what is said in verse 6, and the connection to the Lord's Supper. Your boasting is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven ferments the whole batch of dough? Clear away the old leaven, so that you may be a new batch, inasmuch as you are free from ferment. For indeed Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. So then, let us keep the festival, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of badness and wickedness, but with unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. The Apostle Paul here alludes to the Lord's evening meal, keeping this festival without the leavening of such flagrantly unrepentant people as the man who had a continuing scandalous relationship with his father's wife. In conjunction with what Paul said at 1 Corinthians 11, the man would be unworthy of the bread and the wine. Early Christians primarily met together in private homes, and part of their meeting together was having a common meal, an agape feast, of which the Lord's Supper played a part. It is in this context that Paul says to the congregation at 1 Corinthians 5:11, "But now I am writing you to stop keeping company with anyone called a brother who is sexually immoral, or a greedy person, or an idolater, or a reviler, or a drunkard, or an extortioner, not even eating with such a man." Note that the Greek word here for you is plural, not singular. Paul was talking to the Corinthians as a congregation and advising the congregation, the plural you, not to keep company with a flagrant wrongdoer. The congregation would not keep company with such a man or eat with him, that is, include him in congregation functions such as the agape feast and the celebration of the Lord's Supper. This is the origin of the word excommunication, meaning exclusion from communion. That is, exclusion from taking the Lord's Supper. This was not a directive for individuals from the Corinthian congregation, which would be the singular you, from shunning such a person. The Greek term translated here, keeping company, is found only 3 times in the Bible, twice in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, and another time in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. "For your part, brothers, do not give up in doing good, but if anyone is not obedient to our word through this letter, keep this one marked, and stop associating with him, so that he may become ashamed. And yet do not consider him an enemy, but continue admonishing him as a brother." Here, the not keeping company, or as the word is translated here, stop associating, is directed at the plural you, that is, the Thessalonians as a congregation. Notice that this person was not to be considered an enemy, but rather they would be admonished as a brother. The New World Translation obscures the meaning by translating the same Greek word as not keeping company in 1 Corinthians and stop associating in 2 Thessalonians. In this way, the Watchtower creates 2 different practices with different levels of exclusion: the milder form of marking and the extreme shunning of disfellowshipping. The practice of secret investigative, judicial, and appeal committees, and the result of extreme shunning, are extra-biblical, for they are not outlined in Scripture. When we look at the example Jesus set, he kept company with flagrant sinners, even eating with them, a fact that the Pharisees criticized. Nowhere do we find Jesus shunning individuals, much less family. It would make little sense for Christians to do the exact opposite. When it came to interpreting Bible law, Jesus was no extremist or fanatic, as some religious leaders in his day were. He said, "I want mercy and not sacrifice."